My gymnast dad woke us at 4:30 a.m. for flexibility tests and withheld meals if we couldn't hold splits for 3 minutes. When I visited for my 18th birthday, my sister Maya answered the door in a wheelchair and whispered, "He broke my back on purpose. I have 4 years of hidden camera footage to prove it." After I turned 7 and my older sister Maya was 8, my father became the most training-obsessed maniac I've ever met. Every morning started with flexibility tests at 4:30 a.m. because champions wake up before their competition. If either of us couldn't hold a split for 3 minutes or our back bend wasn't deep enough, we'd lose meals. The rule was simple. The more flexible you were, the more human you were treated. Well, I myself couldn't stand the pain. It was like my muscles were screaming every second of every day. So I found ways to fake injuries, wrapping my ankles when he wasn't looking. Meanwhile, Maya became Dad's perfect little machine. Her nightly routine consisted of strength training from 8 to 11 p.m. after 6 hours at the gym. She'd ice her joints until they were numb, then practice beam routines on her swollen ankles. Like, what in the actual hell? And instead of our mom intervening, she enabled it even more. When Maya stuck her first double layout at age 11, Dad bought her a $5,000 competition leotard covered in Swarovski crystals. "Look at your sister," Dad would tell me while forcing my leg higher in a stretch. "She understands that greatness requires bleeding." I so desperately wanted to be the girl who could just walk away. But the truth is, I was terrified. So I started trying to earn my dad's approval too. But instead of destroying my body, I'd help coach the younger kids at the gym, organize equipment perfectly, and memorize every Olympic routine from the past decade. But it was never what he wanted. "You should direct all that energy into your tumbling passes," he'd always say. I always knew what he was doing was wrong, but whenever I tried bringing it up to other adults at the gym, they would just talk about how my dad produced champions, and I ought to appreciate the opportunity. So I gaslit myself into thinking it was normal, until I turned 12, that is. Because that's when I came home to Maya collapsed on the bathroom floor, empty bottles of prescription painkillers scattered around her. My hands trembled as I dialed 911, and I immediately tried to keep her conscious. When I heard her whisper, I pressed my ear to her lips. "I just wanted to push through the back pain for regionals," she said, voice shaking. And when she woke up in the hospital bed, the first thing she asked was whether she could still compete. That's when I knew I'd lost my sister forever. After that, I started playing along just to survive. I started training, but would deliberately hold back, making myself look weaker than I was. And I made sure to limp whenever I was around my dad, just to stop him from pushing me harder. But when I turned 14, something shifted. My mom finally grew a spine. She'd been documenting everything secretly. She filed for divorce and full custody. Dad fought it hard, but the medical records were damning. I moved in with Mom and slowly learned to enjoy movement again. Maya told the court she wanted to stay with Dad. By senior year, I was healthy, playing recreational volleyball, actually having fun with sports. Fast forward to when I turned 18. I hadn't seen my dad in years, and my mom asked if I wanted to spend my birthday with him and my sister. I nodded, thinking maybe things had changed. And when the day came, I wore regular clothes, no athletic wear to avoid triggering comments. But nothing could prepare me for what I saw. The second Maya answered the door, I wanted to throw up. She was in a wheelchair, her legs visibly atrophied, wearing a back brace. At 19, she looked broken. "Maya, what the oh my god, you've gotten so weak," she interrupted. My heart shattered, and before I could respond, Dad appeared behind her. "What have you done to yourself?" he snarled, grabbing my arm and squeezing. "You were finally showing potential, and now look at you. You're pathetic. Not an ounce of muscle." I tried to leave, but Dad blocked the door. "You're not going anywhere until you show me your routine," he said, pointing to the practice beam he still kept in the living room. "You need to get back on track right now." When I refused, he tried to physically force me onto the beam. Maya wheeled over to help him, grabbing at my legs. "This is what you need," she kept saying. "This is what we were born for." I was screaming and crying while they tried to force my body into positions. Dad kept saying, "This is for your own good," while basically trying to manipulate my limbs like I was a doll. I managed to break free and run to the bathroom, locking myself in while calling Mom. They pounded on the door, Dad screaming that I was choosing to be ordinary and spitting on the family legacy. Mom called 911 and drove over herself. By the time police arrived, I'd hyperventilated so badly I nearly passed out. The police took one look at Maya's medical equipment and prescription bottles and called for additional units. But what happened next changed everything. As the paramedics were checking on Maya, she grabbed my hand and whispered something that made my blood run cold. "He did it on purpose. The injury. I have proof. I have videos." And that's when I realized my sister hadn't chosen to stay with Dad at all. She'd been trapped, gathering evidence of what he'd really been doing to her for 4 years, and we were about to take our revenge together. The paramedics were still checking Maya's vitals when she squeezed my hand harder. Her eyes darted between the officers and our father, who was pacing near the doorway, his face twisted with rage. I leaned closer to her wheelchair, pretending to comfort her while she mouthed words I couldn't quite catch. Dad stepped forward, his voice dripping with false concern. "Officers, this is clearly a misunderstanding. My daughters and I were just having a training session. Sometimes athletes need tough love to reach their potential." One of the officers, a woman with graying hair, looked at the practice beam in the living room, then at Maya's wheelchair. Her expression hardened. She walked over to examine the prescription bottles on the coffee table while her partner kept Dad in view. Mom burst through the door, immediately rushing to my side. She wrapped her arms around me, and I felt my whole body shaking against hers. Dad's jaw clenched when he saw her. "This is a family matter," he said, moving to block Mom's path to Maya. "You have no right to be here. The divorce gave me full custody of Maya, and you've clearly done such a wonderful job." Mom shot back, her voice trembling with fury as she gestured at Maya's condition. The female officer held up one of the prescription bottles. "These are some heavy painkillers, multiple prescriptions from different doctors." She turned to Maya. "Are all of these yours?" Maya nodded slowly, her hands gripping the wheelchair arms. Dad immediately jumped in. "She has chronic pain from her training. Completely legitimate prescriptions. I have all the documentation." While Dad was distracted explaining to the officers, Maya caught my eye again. She subtly pointed to her phone in her lap, then to the hallway leading to her room. I understood. Whatever evidence she had, it was there. The paramedics finished their examination, and one of them, a young man with kind eyes, knelt beside Maya. "We should really take you in for evaluation. Some of these medications shouldn't be mixed, and your muscle deterioration is concerning." "She's fine," Dad snapped. "She doesn't need a hospital. She needs to get back to training once she heals." Maya's whole body tensed. "I want to go," she said quietly. It was the first time I'd heard her disagree with Dad in years. Dad's face went red. "You don't know what you're saying. You're confused from the medications." "Sir," Step back, the male officer warned, moving between Dad and Maya. Mom pulled out her phone, showing the officer something on the screen. I have years of documentation, medical records, photos, videos of his training methods. I tried to get full custody of both girls, but the court only gave me my younger daughter. Dad lunged forward, trying to grab Mom's phone. The officers immediately restrained him, and suddenly the room exploded into chaos. Dad was shouting about his rights, about how we were destroying Maya's future, about how ungrateful we all were. As they held him back, Maya rolled her wheelchair closer to me. My room, she whispered urgently. Under the floorboard by my closet. Everything's there. 4 years of everything. The female officer overheard and nodded to her partner. I'll check it out. She looked at Maya. Is it okay if I search your room? Maya nodded eagerly. Too eagerly for someone who'd supposedly chosen to stay with Dad. The officer disappeared down the hallway while Dad continued his tirade. You're poisoning them against me, he shouted at Mom. I made Maya a champion. She was heading to the Olympics before her injury. What injury? I asked, my voice stronger now. What really happened to her? Dad's eyes narrowed dangerously. A training accident. She pushed too hard like she always did. That's what champions do. Maya's hand found mine again. Tell them about the beam, she said, louder this time. Tell them about that night. Shut up, Dad roared, struggling against the officer's grip. You don't remember it correctly. The medications have confused you. The female officer returned from the hallway, her face pale. She was carrying a small box and what looked like several USB drives. We're going to need to take these into evidence, she said quietly, and we're calling for backup. Dad's struggles intensified. Those are private training videos. You have no warrant. Your daughter gave us permission, the officer replied calmly, and based on what I just saw, we have probable cause for a full investigation. The paramedics were preparing to transfer Maya to a gurney. As they lifted her from the wheelchair, her shirt rode up slightly, revealing deep scarring across her lower back. I wonder how Maya managed to secretly film everything for 4 years while being so injured. The way she pointed to her room makes me think she planned this moment carefully. How did she hide those USB drives under the floorboard without her dad noticing? Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Those are from before, Maya said, her voice growing stronger. From when I was 15. He said the only way to achieve perfect form was to understand the consequences of imperfection. I felt sick. All those years I'd thought Maya was his willing accomplice, his perfect gymnast, but she'd been his victim, trapped and gathering evidence while her body broke down. More police arrived, including what looked like a detective. They began photographing the living room, the practice beam, the medical supplies. Dad had gone quiet now, his face a mask of cold fury. As the paramedics wheeled Maya toward the ambulance, she reached for my hand one more time. There's more, she said. So much more. The videos show everything. The forced training on injuries, the withheld medical care, the night she trailed off, tears streaming down her face. The night he what? I asked, though part of me already knew. The night he broke my back on purpose, because I told him I wanted to quit. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Mom made a sound like a wounded animal. The officers exchanged grim looks, and Dad, for the first time, showed a flicker of fear. They took him away in handcuffs while he shouted about lawsuits and false accusations. Mom rode with Maya in the ambulance while I followed with one of the officers. They needed my statement, they said. They needed to understand the full scope of what had been happening in that house. At the hospital, they rushed Maya into examination. The doctors emerged hours later with grave expressions. The damage was extensive, they said. Multiple poorly healed fractures, severe muscle atrophy from being forced to train through injuries, kidney damage from years of painkiller abuse, malnutrition because Dad had continued his meal withholding punishments even after her injury. I sat in the waiting room, my mind reeling. Every memory from our childhood took on a darker cast. Every time I'd thought Maya was Dad's favorite, she'd actually been his primary victim. Every time I'd resented her for staying with him, she'd been documenting his abuse. A detective arrived to take my statement. I told her everything I could remember. The 4:30 a.m. flexibility tests, the withheld meals, the way Dad would force our bodies into painful positions, how I'd escaped while Maya stayed behind. Why didn't she leave during the custody battle? I asked. Why did she tell the court she wanted to stay? The detective's expression was grim. Based on the videos we've reviewed so far, it appears your father threatened to hurt you if she didn't stay. He told her that as long as she complied, he'd leave you alone. My world tilted. Maya had sacrificed herself to protect me. All these years, I'd thought I was the lucky one who got away, but I'd only escaped because my sister had made herself the target. Mom emerged from Maya's room, her face streaked with tears. She wants to see you, she said softly. I found Maya propped up in the hospital bed, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The bravado from earlier had faded, leaving just my broken big sister. I'm sorry, she whispered as I sat beside her. I wanted to tell you so many times, but he monitored everything. My calls, my texts, my emails. The only safe place was those hidden cameras I set up. He never knew about those. How long? I asked. How long have you been recording? Since right after the custody hearing. I knew I'd need proof. I knew someday. She trailed off, then met my eyes. I knew someday you'd come back, and we could finally stop him. I held her hand, careful of the IV line. What happens now? Now we heal, she said. Both of us. And we make sure he never does this to anyone else. The detective returned with more questions. Maya answered them all, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. She told them about the forced training sessions that lasted 12 hours, the times he'd denied her medical care for injuries, the way he deliberately hyperextended her back during a stretching session when she'd threatened to tell someone about the abuse. With each word, the case against our father grew stronger. The videos, the medical records, our testimonies, it all painted a picture of systematic abuse disguised as athletic training. The detective closed her notebook and stood to leave. I watched her walk down the hospital corridor, then turned back to Maya. She was already drifting off to sleep, exhausted from the ordeal. Mom stayed by her bedside while I stepped outside to get some air. The parking lot was nearly empty at this hour. I sat on a bench near the emergency entrance, trying to process everything that had happened. My phone buzzed with messages from friends asking about my birthday, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. How could I explain that my birthday celebration had turned into discovering years of hidden abuse? A security guard walked past, nodding at me sympathetically. I realized I must have looked as shattered as I felt. My clothes were still disheveled from the struggle at Dad's house, and I could feel dried tears on my cheeks. Back inside, I found Mom talking with a social worker. The woman introduced herself as Victoria and explained she'd be handling Maya's case going forward. She had kind eyes but a no-nonsense demeanor that made me trust her immediately. Victoria pulled me aside to explain the process. Child Protective Protective Services would be investigating, even though Maya was technically an adult. The years of documented abuse while she was a minor gave them jurisdiction. She handed me her card and told me to call if I remembered anything else. The next few days blurred together. Maya underwent multiple medical evaluations. The doctors discovered compression fractures in her spine that had never properly healed. Her muscle atrophy was so severe that physical therapy would take months, maybe years. The kidney damage from painkiller abuse added another layer of complexity to her recovery. I stayed at Mom's house, unable to shake the image of Maya in that wheelchair. Every morning I woke up expecting it to have been a nightmare, but then I'd check my phone and see the messages from Victoria, updating us on the investigation's progress. The police had seized Dad's computer and found hundreds of hours of training footage. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect from an obsessive gymnastics coach, but scattered throughout were darker moments. Maya forced to continue beam routines with visible injuries, Dad twisting her limbs past their breaking point. The audio was even worse than the visuals. Mom and I visited Maya every day. She was getting stronger, both physically and mentally. The hospital had assigned her a therapist who specialized in abuse cases. For the first time in years, Maya was talking about her experiences without fear of retribution. One afternoon, Maya asked me to help her go through the evidence she'd hidden. The police had already copied everything, but she wanted me to understand the full scope of what she'd endured. We sat together in her hospital room, her laptop open between us. The first video made me run to the bathroom. It showed Dad forcing Maya to do back walkovers repeatedly, despite her crying that something was wrong with her spine. The timestamp showed it was 3 days before her back injury. He'd known something was wrong and pushed her anyway. Maya held my hand as we watched. She explained how she'd hidden tiny cameras around the house and gym, how she'd learned to transfer the footage to encrypted drives when Dad was asleep, how she'd mailed backup copies to a post office box she'd secretly rented. The evidence was meticulous. Financial records showing Dad had taken out credit cards in Maya's name to pay for training expenses, medical records he'd forged to get prescriptions from multiple doctors, training logs where he'd documented punishments for perceived failures. Victoria visited to update us on the investigation. Dad had hired a lawyer and was claiming the videos were taken out of context. He insisted he was just a dedicated coach pushing his athlete to excellence, but the medical evidence was undeniable. Maya's injuries were consistent with systematic abuse, not training accidents. The gym where Dad coached had suspended him pending the investigation. Other parents were coming forward with concerns they'd dismissed at the time. One mother broke down crying, describing how Dad had berated her daughter until the girl quit gymnastics entirely. I returned to school but couldn't focus on classes. My professors were understanding when I explained I was dealing with a family emergency. My volleyball coach told me to take all the time I needed. The normalcy of campus life felt surreal after everything that had happened. Maya was discharged from the hospital after 2 weeks. She moved in with Mom and me, her room quickly filling with medical equipment. A physical therapist came 3 times a week. The sessions were grueling. Maya had to relearn basic movements, fighting through pain and muscle weakness. I helped however I could, driving her to appointments, preparing meals that met her strict dietary requirements, simply sitting with her during the hardest moments. We developed a routine that gave structure to the chaos. The investigation continued to uncover disturbing details. Dad had isolated Maya from her peers, convincing her that friendships would distract from training. He'd monitored her communications, reading every text and email. The psychological control was as damaging as the physical abuse. Victoria arranged for a meeting with the prosecutor assigned to the case. The woman was sharp and thorough, walking us through what to expect. Dad was facing multiple charges related to child abuse and endangerment. The forged medical documents added fraud charges. The credit cards in Maya's name meant identity theft. Dad's lawyer reached out, trying to negotiate a plea deal. Maya's spy camera setup would make secret agents jealous. Who knew gymnastics training could turn someone into a surveillance expert with encrypted drives and secret post office boxes? He wanted to avoid jail time in exchange for surrendering his coaching licenses and staying away from Maya. The prosecutor laughed at the offer. With the mountain of evidence Maya had collected, they were confident about going to trial. Maya struggled with the decision. Part of her still felt guilty about turning Dad in. The therapist explained this was common in abuse cases. Dad had conditioned her to believe she was responsible for his actions. Breaking that mental programming would take time. I watched my sister fight battles on multiple fronts. Physical therapy pushed her body to its limits. Therapy sessions forced her to confront years of trauma. The legal proceedings required her to relive her worst experiences. But she faced each challenge with determination I'd never seen before. The other gymnasts from Dad's program started reaching out. Many had similar stories of excessive training and emotional manipulation. None had experienced the extreme physical abuse Maya endured, but the patterns were clear. Dad had created a culture of fear and compliance. Mom threw herself into supporting Maya's recovery. She took leave from work to manage the medical appointments and legal meetings. She researched spinal injuries and physical therapy techniques. She became Maya's fiercest advocate and protector. I struggled with my own guilt. Every accomplishment I'd achieved while Maya suffered felt tainted. My volleyball scholarships, my healthy relationship with sports, my normal teenage years, all of it had come at the cost of my sister's sacrifice. The therapist recommended I attend some sessions too. She explained that survivor's guilt was common in situations like ours. I'd been a child, unable to protect Maya, or even understand what was happening. But logic didn't erase the feeling that I should have done something. Maya's physical progress was slow but steady. She graduated from wheelchair to walker, then from walker to cane. Each milestone was celebrated and documented. The determination that Dad had exploited for gymnastics now fueled her recovery. We discovered Dad had been spreading rumors about the case. He claimed Maya had injured herself deliberately for attention, that Mom and I had brainwashed her into making false accusations. Some people in the gymnastics community believed him, choosing loyalty to a successful coach over protecting children. Victoria helped us file restraining orders. Dad was prohibited from contacting any of us or coming within 500 feet. He was also banned from coaching youth sports pending the criminal case, but we still felt his presence lurking at the edges of our lives. Maya's evidence revealed more disturbing patterns. Dad had filmed her medical appointments without consent. He'd recorded private conversations where she expressed doubts about continuing gymnastics. He'd used these recordings to manipulate her, threatening to release edited versions that made her look unstable. The prosecutor added voyeurism and blackmail to the charges. Each new revelation strengthened the case but deepened our horror at what Maya had endured. She'd lived lived under constant surveillance and threat for years. I took a semester off from school to help with Maya's care. My professors arranged for me to complete coursework remotely. My life revolved around medical appointments, legal meetings, and supporting my sister's recovery. Maya started writing about her experiences. The therapist had suggested journaling, but Maya took it further. She wrote detailed accounts of specific incidents, processing trauma through narrative. Her writing was raw and powerful, capturing the reality of abuse in ways the legal documents couldn't. We learned Dad had hidden assets in offshore accounts. Money that should have gone to Maya's medical care or education had been funneled into his personal investments. The fraud investigation expanded to include financial abuse spanning years. Maya's story inspired other athletes to come forward. A former gymnast from Dad's program reached out with her own evidence. She'd quit at 15 after Dad's training methods caused permanent shoulder damage. She'd been too scared to speak up at the time. The investigation revealed Dad had a pattern of targeting vulnerable athletes, girls from difficult family situations, those desperate for approval. He'd positioned himself as their path to success, then exploited that trust. Maya had been his longest-term victim, but not his only one. Physical therapy hit a plateau. The doctors explained that Maya's spinal damage limited how much function she could regain. She'd always have mobility challenges and chronic pain. The realization hit her hard, forcing her to grieve the future she'd never have. But Maya adapted with the same intensity she'd once applied to gymnastics. She researched adaptive equipment and alternative therapies. She connected with online communities of people with similar injuries. She refused to let physical limitations define her possibilities. The legal proceedings dragged on. Dad's lawyer filed motion after motion, trying to get evidence dismissed or charges reduced. Each delay meant more time in limbo, unable to move forward while the past held us hostage. Maya decided to pursue online college courses. She'd missed so much education during her years of intensive training. Starting with basic requirements felt humbling, but she approached it with determination. Every assignment completed was a step toward the life Dad had denied her. I returned to campus for spring semester, but remained deeply involved in Maya's care. I'd call between classes to check on her, drive home for medical appointments, help with homework when concepts felt overwhelming. Our roles had reversed, with me supporting her the way she'd once protected me. The prosecutor warned us that Dad's lawyer was building a defense around Maya's pain medication use. They'd try to claim her testimony was unreliable due to substance influence. It was a cruel strategy, using the consequences of abuse to discredit the victim. Maya responded by documenting her medication reduction. Under careful medical supervision, she weaned off the strongest painkillers. The process was excruciating, but she wanted to face Dad in court with complete clarity. We discovered Dad had been grooming other young gymnasts, even while out on bail. Despite the restraining orders and coaching ban, he'd been giving private lessons in a friend's garage. The brazenness stunned even the prosecutor. This violation of bail conditions finally got Dad remanded to custody. Seeing him in handcuffs again provided some relief, but we knew it was temporary. The trial still loomed ahead, promising to dredge up every painful memory. Maya's writing evolved into something more structured. She started working on a memoir about her experiences. Not for publication, she insisted, but for her own processing. The act of crafting narrative from trauma gave her a sense of control she'd never had before. I watched my sister transform. The broken girl in the wheelchair was becoming someone new. Not the gymnast Dad had tried to create or the victim he'd left behind, but a survivor finding her own strength. Her recovery wasn't just physical, but a complete reconstruction of self. The other victims formed an informal support group. They met monthly to share experiences and encouragement. Maya initially hesitated to join, feeling her abuse had been more severe, but she found community with others who understood the particular betrayal of a trusted coach. Mom and I attended our own support group for family members of abuse survivors. Learning to navigate our roles without overstepping or enabling became its own challenge. We had to resist the urge to make decisions for Maya, while still providing necessary support. The financial investigation uncovered the full scope of Dad's theft. He'd stolen over $200,000 through various schemes over the years. Money from Maya's endorsement deals as a young gymnast, funds raised for her training. Even her college savings had been drained. Recovery wasn't linear. Maya had bad days where pain and depression overwhelmed her progress. Days when she couldn't get out of bed. Days when the weight of everything Dad had taken from her felt unbearable. But she kept fighting through each setback. I struggled with my own athletic pursuits. Playing volleyball felt trivial compared to Maya's battles, but she insisted I continue, saying my healthy relationship with sports proved Dad hadn't destroyed everything. My games became bright spots in our difficult routine. The trial date approached like a storm on the horizon. We prepared with the prosecutor, reviewing testimony and evidence. Maya would have to face Dad in court to speak her truth while he sat mere feet away. The prospect terrified all of us, but Maya had survived 4 years of gathering evidence while living under his control. She'd endured physical torture disguised as training. She'd sacrificed her body to protect me. Testifying would be just one more battle in a war she was determined to win. The prosecutor scheduled our final preparation meeting for the following week. I drove Maya to the courthouse, watching her grip her cane tighter as we approached the building. She'd practiced her testimony dozens of times, but facing Dad in person would be different. Inside the conference room, the prosecutor spread out folders containing Maya's evidence. Each video clip had been cataloged and time-stamped. The medical records were organized chronologically, showing the progression of injuries over years. Maya studied everything with intense focus, memorizing details she'd lived through but tried to forget. Victoria arrived with updates from Child Protective Services. Their investigation had expanded to include Dad's current coaching activities. 3 families had come forward after learning about the charges. Their daughters showed early signs of the same controlling patterns Maya had endured. The prosecutor explained the hearing process. Life has this twisted sense of timing. Maya spent years gathering proof while literally breaking her back, and Dad's brilliant defense strategy is basically, she took pain meds for the injuries I caused, so clearly she's making it all up. That's like an arsonist claiming the smoke made witnesses too dizzy to identify him correctly. Dad would appear via video link from jail, reducing direct confrontation. Maya would present her evidence while the judge determined whether to proceed with formal charges. The restraining orders would be reviewed and potentially extended. Maya spent hours reviewing her hidden camera footage. Each video triggered memories she'd suppressed. I sat beside her, holding tissues and water, watching her relive moments that had shaped her entire adolescence. Her determination never wavered, even when the images made her hands shake. Mom coordinated with Maya's medical team to ensure she'd have proper support during the hearing. The physical therapist adjusted her treatment schedule to minimize pain on court days. The therapist provided coping strategies for managing trauma responses in public settings. I took notes during every meeting, creating a timeline of events for Maya to reference. The sheer volume of evidence was overwhelming. 4 years of systematic documentation painted an undeniable picture of escalating abuse disguised as athletic training. The night before the hearing, Maya couldn't sleep. I found her in the living room at 3 a.m., reviewing her notes by lamplight. Her hands moved across pages covered in precise handwriting, each detail a piece of the puzzle she'd been assembling since the custody hearing. We arrived at the courthouse early. Maya wore professional clothes that concealed her back brace. She'd chosen to use her cane rather than the walker, wanting to appear strong despite her limitations. Mom and I flanked her as we entered the building. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Maya took her seat at the table with the prosecutor while Mom and I sat in the gallery. Victoria was there, along with the detective who'd handled the initial investigation. Several other families had come to observe, their daughters having shared their own experiences with Dad's coaching. Dad appeared on the video screen in his orange jumpsuit. His face showed none of the charm he'd used to manipulate parents and athletes. He stared directly at Maya with an expression of cold fury that made my stomach turn. The judge reviewed the charges while Maya sat perfectly still. Child endangerment, aggravated assault, fraud, identity theft. Each count represented years of calculated abuse. The prosecutor presented the evidence methodically, building an irrefutable case. Maya took the stand with careful movements, adjusting her position to minimize pain. She spoke clearly and directly, describing specific incidents captured on her hidden cameras. Her voice remained steady, even when recounting the night Dad had deliberately injured her spine. The defense attorney tried to paint Maya as an attention-seeking former athlete bitter about her lost career. He questioned her medication use, her memory, her motivations for recording Dad secretly. Maya responded to each challenge with documented evidence and medical records. When the prosecutor played the video of Dad hyperextending Maya's back, several people in the gallery gasped. The timestamp showed it was 3 days before her catastrophic injury. Dad's voice on the recording was calm as he pushed her body past its breaking point, ignoring her pleas to stop. The judge called a recess after 2 hours of testimony. Maya's hands shook as I helped her to a private room. The physical therapist was waiting with ice packs and pain medication. Mom rubbed Maya's shoulders while she recovered from the strain of sitting upright for so long. During the break, one of the young gymnasts approached us in the hallway. She thanked Maya for speaking up, explaining how Dad's training methods had been escalating with her too. Her parents had pulled her from the program after learning about the investigation. The afternoon session focused on the financial abuse. The prosecutor presented evidence of forged documents, stolen funds, and credit fraud. Maya had kept meticulous records of every transaction, every forged signature, every diverted payment. The total exceeded $200,000 over 4 years. Dad's attorney argued that parents had authority over their minor children's finances. The prosecutor countered with evidence that the theft had continued after Maya turned 18 and that the funds were specifically designated for education and medical care, not training expenses. The judge reviewed Maya's medical records in detail. The compression fractures, muscle atrophy, and kidney damage painted a clear picture of systematic abuse. The doctor's testimony via video link confirmed that Maya's injuries were consistent with forced overtraining and deliberate harm. As the hearing progressed, Dad's composure cracked. He began interrupting, shouting about ungrateful daughters and destroyed dreams. The judge warned him repeatedly before finally muting his microphone. His silent rage on the screen was somehow more disturbing than his outbursts. Maya presented her final piece of evidence, a recording from the night of her injury. Dad's voice was clear as he told her that quitting would mean betraying everything they'd worked for. The sound of her spine hyperextending was audible, followed by her scream and Dad telling her to stop being dramatic. The courtroom fell silent after the recording ended. Even the defense attorney seemed shaken. The judge took several moments before speaking, his voice heavy with controlled anger as he addressed Dad's image on the screen. The judge found sufficient evidence to proceed with all charges. He extended the restraining orders indefinitely and revoked Dad's bail based on his continued coaching activities. Dad would remain in custody until trial. The relief in the room was palpable. Maya collapsed into her wheelchair as soon as we left the courtroom. The effort of maintaining composure had exhausted her completely. Mom and I wheeled her to the car while Victoria handled the paperwork for the extended protection orders. Over the following weeks, more families came forward. Dad's pattern of targeting vulnerable athletes became clearer with each story. None had experienced the extreme physical abuse Maya endured, but all showed signs of psychological manipulation and inappropriate training methods. The prosecutor built an even stronger case with the new testimonies. Dad's lawyer attempted several plea negotiations, each rejected as inadequate. Maya insisted on seeing the case through to trial, wanting formal acknowledgement of what she'd endured. Physical therapy continued its slow progress. Maya learned to manage chronic pain while building what strength she could. The spinal damage was permanent, but she adapted with fierce determination. Every small improvement was celebrated as a victory over Dad's attempts to destroy her. I returned to campus but drove home every weekend. My volleyball season started, and Maya insisted on attending my games. She'd sit in the bleachers with Mom, cheering louder than anyone despite the pain it caused her. Seeing her there gave me strength I hadn't known I needed. The trial date was set for 6 months out. Maya used the time to continue her online education and physical recovery. She connected with other abuse survivors, finding community in shared experiences. Her writing evolved from processing trauma to advocating for athlete protection. Dad's former gym implemented new safeguarding policies. Parents demanded transparency in training methods and medical decisions. The culture of blind trust in successful coaches began to shift. Maya's courage had created ripples of change throughout the local gymnastics community. The financial investigation revealed Dad had been planning to flee the country. He'd been transferring stolen funds to offshore accounts and had obtained a fake passport. The discovery added federal charges to his case and eliminated any possibility of bail. Maya's health stabilized enough for her to testify at trial without accommodation. She wanted to face Dad directly, to speak her truth while looking him in the eye. The prosecutor supported her decision while ensuring medical support would be available. As the trial approached, our family drew closer. Mom took indefinite leave from work to support Maya full-time. I adjusted my class schedule to be home more often. We created a network of support that Dad had tried to prevent through isolation and control. The week before trial, Maya asked me to help her sort through old gymnastics photos. We found images images of her early competitions, before Dad's obsession had turned violent. She looked so young and happy, unaware of what was coming. We kept a few photos and destroyed the rest. On the morning of the trial, Maya dressed carefully in professional attire that accommodated her back brace. She chose to walk with her cane, each step deliberate and strong. Mom and I walked beside her as we entered the courthouse for the final confrontation. The courtroom was packed with families from the gymnastics community, other survivors, and media who'd been following the case. Maya took her seat at the prosecution table, her evidence boxes stacked nearby. 4 years of documentation would finally serve its purpose. Dad entered in shackles, his attorney beside him. He'd lost weight in custody, his former athletic build diminished, but his eyes still held the same cold intensity that had terrorized Maya for years. She met his gaze without flinching. The trial proceeded with methodical precision. The prosecutor presented evidence chronologically, showing the escalation from intense training to outright abuse. Maya's hidden camera footage provided indisputable proof of Dad's methods. The medical evidence confirmed the devastating consequences. Maya testified for 3 days, detailing years of abuse with calm clarity. She explained her decision to stay and gather evidence, knowing it meant sacrificing her body. She described the night Dad broke her back, how he'd twisted her spine while telling her that quitting meant failure. The defense's attempts to discredit Maya fell flat against the mountain of evidence. Other gymnasts testified about Dad's controlling behavior and inappropriate training methods. Parents described how he'd isolated their daughters and undermined family relationships. On the final day, the prosecutor played a compilation of Dad's own training videos, his voice narrating as he pushed young athletes beyond their limits, dismissing injuries as weakness, demanding absolute obedience. The pattern was undeniable. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge imposed maximum sentences for each charge to run consecutively. Dad would spend decades in prison. As the verdict was read, Maya finally allowed herself to cry. We left the courthouse surrounded by other families who'd found courage in Maya's story. The local gymnastics community had begun implementing new safeguarding measures. Maya's sacrifice had protected future generations of athletes. In the parking lot, Maya asked me to drive to the gym where everything had started. We sat in the car, looking at the building where she'd spent her childhood. She didn't speak, just stared at the place that had shaped and scarred her. That evening, our family had dinner together for the first time without fear. Maya was quiet but present, no longer guarding secrets or gathering evidence. Mom cooked her favorite meal while I set the table. Simple normalcy felt like a miracle. Maya returned to physical therapy with renewed purpose. The trial's end had lifted a weight that wasn't physical, but had affected her body nonetheless. Her progress accelerated, though the permanent damage remained a daily reminder of Dad's abuse. I finished my volleyball season with Maya at every home game. She became a fixture in the stands, inspiring my teammates with her resilience. My coach offered her a volunteer position helping with team motivation and mental health support. The financial restitution process began slowly. Dad's hidden assets were frozen and would eventually be returned to Maya. The amount would cover her medical expenses and education, though no money could restore what he'd taken from her body and childhood. Maya enrolled in a full course load for the fall semester. Online classes accommodated her medical needs while she pursued a degree in sports psychology. She wanted to help young athletes recognize and escape abusive coaching relationships. Our relationship as sisters transformed. The protector-protected dynamic dissolved into mutual support. We talked openly about the years of separation, the guilt and resentment that Dad had cultivated between us. Healing happened in small moments of shared understanding. Mom began attending her own therapy to process enabling Dad's early abuse. She volunteered with organizations supporting families affected by child abuse in sports. Her documentation from years earlier became a template for other parents recognizing warning signs. 6 months after the trial, Maya achieved a milestone in physical therapy. She walked the length of the parallel bars without her cane. The achievement was bittersweet, knowing she'd once flown through the air with easy grace, but she celebrated the victory over Dad's attempts to destroy her completely. The gymnastics community continued evolving. Coaches underwent mandatory safeguarding training. Parents gained access to observe practices. Athletes learned their rights and how to report concerns. Maya's story had catalyzed changes that would protect future generations. On the anniversary of the trial verdict, Maya asked me to go with her to file official paperwork. She was legally changing her last name, severing the final connection to Dad. I held her hand as she signed the documents, choosing Mom's maiden name instead. Maya's online presence grew as she shared her recovery journey, not for fame or attention, but to help other survivors recognize abuse and find hope. She connected with athletes worldwide who'd experienced similar trauma, building a support network Dad had tried to prevent. My final volleyball game of the season was senior night. Maya surprised me by walking onto the court with just her cane to present flowers. The crowd erupted in applause, recognizing her courage. She whispered that my healthy relationship with sports was her greatest victory. As I write this, Maya is studying for finals while managing daily physical therapy. She'll never compete again, never regain full mobility, but she's free. We both are. Dad's prison sentence ensures he'll never coach or harm another athlete. Our story isn't unique. Across the country, young athletes endure abuse disguised as training. Maya's courage in documenting and exposing Dad's methods has helped others recognize the signs. Her sacrifice protected not just me, but countless future athletes. Tonight, Maya and I will have dinner with Mom like we do every Sunday. We'll talk about school, my volleyball recruitment, her plans for internships in sports psychology, normal family conversations that once seemed impossible. Recovery isn't a destination, but a daily choice to keep moving forward. The scars remain, physical and emotional. Maya lives with chronic pain that no amount of justice can erase, but she faces each day with the same determination Dad tried to exploit and destroy. She's rebuilding her life on her own terms, one careful step at a time. Subscribe for more. I'm trying to hit 250,000 by the end of the year.